What happens when Hollywood's most unpredictable actor meets late-night television's most passive-aggressive host? You're about to witness one of the most uncomfortable interviews in talk show history, where what started as routine promotion turned into an absolute disaster that left audiences stunned and one A-list celebrity walking off set. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below because this story is absolutely wild. Mark Wahlberg walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set that evening with his usual confident swagger, waving to the audience before settling into the guest chair. The crowd was electric, cheering for the Boston native who had just wrapped filming on his latest action thriller. Jimmy Kimmel, sitting behind his desk with that trademark smirk, seemed ready for what should have been a straightforward promotional interview. "Mark Wahlberg, everybody," Jimmy announced as the applause died down. "Thanks for being here, Mark. I know you're busy saving the world in movies and probably in real life too, knowing you." Mark chuckled and adjusted his position in the chair. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy. Always good to be here in Hollywood. Even if it's not my favorite place in the world." "Oh right, because you're all about that Boston life now," Jimmy replied, his tone carrying just a hint of something that wasn't quite friendly. "Tell me, do you miss the good old days when you could just, walk around Boston without people recognizing you? Back when you were just, what was it, Marky Mark?" The audience laughed, but Mark's expression shifted slightly. His smile remained, but his eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Those were different times, Jimmy. I was young. Made some mistakes. Learned from them. That's what growing up is about." Sure. Jimmy nodded, leaning back in his chair with that characteristic lean that suggested he was getting comfortable for something. "But you know what I find interesting? You've really reinvented yourself, haven't you? From the underwear modeling to the music career. And now you're this serious actor and producer. It's quite the transformation. People change, Jimmy. People evolve. I've been fortunate enough to have opportunities to grow in this business." Jimmy's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Right, evolve. That's one way to put it. I mean, some people might say you've just gotten really good at managing your image, controlling the narrative." Mark leaned forward slightly, his Boston accent becoming more pronounced. "What exactly are you getting at here, Jimmy?" "Oh, nothing. Jimmy waved his hand dismissively, but his grin suggested otherwise. "I just think it's fascinating how Hollywood works. How someone can completely reinvent themselves and everyone just goes along with it, like collective amnesia or something." The studio audience was starting to sense the tension. The usual lighthearted banter between host and guest was taking on an edge that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Mark's jaw tightened, and he sat back in his chair, studying Jimmy with the kind of intensity he usually reserved for his most serious dramatic roles. "You know what, Jimmy? If you got something to say, just say it. Don't dance around it with all this passive-aggressive nonsense." Jimmy's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Passive-aggressive? Me? Mark, I'm just making conversation. This is what we do on talk shows. We talk." "Yeah, well, there's talking and then there's whatever this is supposed to be," Mark replied, his voice remaining level but carrying an unmistakable warning. "You invited me here to talk about my new movie. So let's talk about the movie." Of course, the movie," Jimmy said, picking up a card from his desk and glancing at it briefly before setting it back down. "But you know what I think is really interesting? Your whole journey from the streets of Boston to Hollywood elite? I mean, that's quite the leap, isn't it?" "Jimmy, what the hell is wrong with you tonight?" Mark asked, and now the audience could hear the genuine irritation in his voice. "You're acting like we got some kind of problem here." Jimmy held up his hands in a gesture of innocence. "No problem at all, Mark. I'm just curious about the real Mark Wahlberg. Beneath all the Hollywood polish. The guy who really knows how to handle himself when things get tough." "Handle myself?" Mark's voice dropped lower, and anyone who had seen his movies knew that tone. It was the voice he used right before his characters did something explosive. "What exactly do you think you know about how I handle myself?" "Well, I mean, you've got quite the reputation, don't you? For being, let's say, direct in your approach to problems." The tension in the studio was now thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark stood up from his chair, and Jimmy's confidence seemed to waver for the first time since the interview began. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here as a professional to talk about my work, to promote a movie that a lot of people worked really hard on. But if you want to sit there and take shots at me for some reason I can't figure out, then we got a problem." Jimmy tried to recover, his voice taking on that familiar late-night host smoothness. Mark, sit down. Let's reset here. I think maybe we're having a miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jimmy, I've been doing interviews for 25 years. I know the difference between miscommunication and someone trying to get under my skin for their own entertainment. The audience was dead silent now, watching what felt less like an interview and more like the prelude to an actual confrontation. Mark remained standing, his hands at his sides, his entire body language suggesting a man who was rapidly reaching the end of his patience. Jimmy, perhaps realizing he had pushed further than intended, attempted to steer things back to safer ground. Okay. Let's just talk about the movie then. Your new film, what's it called again? Don't, Mark said quietly, but with such force that it carried clearly through the silent studio. Don't pretend like you don't know what you're doing here. Jimmy shifted in his chair, his confidence visibly shaken by Mark's quiet but threatening tone. The studio lights seemed harsher now, illuminating the sweat that was beginning to form on the host's forehead. But instead of backing down, Jimmy made the mistake that would turn this uncomfortable interview into television infamy. Look, Mark, I think you're being a little sensitive here, Jimmy said with a forced laugh that echoed awkwardly in the silent studio. I mean, come on. We're all adults here. Can't we have a real conversation without you getting all, street about it? The words hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Mark's face went completely still. And for a moment, the only sound in the entire studio was the hum of the cameras. Even the production crew seemed to hold their breath. Street? Mark repeated slowly, his Boston accent now thick enough to cut glass. Did you just say I was getting street about it? Jimmy realized immediately that he had crossed a line, but pride and the pressure of being on live television pushed him forward instead of allowing him to retreat. I just meant, you're getting a little intense over what's supposed to be a fun interview. Fun? Mark took a step closer to Jimmy's desk, and the host instinctively leaned back in his chair. You think this is fun? You think sitting here while you take cheap shots at me and my background is supposed to be fun? Mark, please, sit down, Jimmy pleaded, but his voice cracked slightly. Let's move on to the movie. No, Mark said, pointing a finger at Jimmy. You don't get to do that. You don't get to poke and prod and make your little comments and then try to move on like nothing happened when you realize you pushed too far. The audience was completely silent now, some people looking genuinely scared. This had gone far beyond the typical late-night comedy moment where a guest gets mildly annoyed. This was real anger, and everyone could feel it. Jimmy tried to regain control of his show. Mark, I understand you're upset, but we're on television here. Maybe we should take a commercial break and then... We're on television? Mark interrupted, his voice rising. Oh, so now you're worried about being on television? You weren't worried about that when you were trying to embarrass me in front of your audience. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, Jimmy protested weakly. Really? Then what would you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you brought me here to be your entertainment for the night. Like I'm some kind of dancing monkey who's supposed to smile and take whatever garbage you want to throw at me. Jimmy's face flushed red, and his own temper finally began to show. Look, Mark, I've had hundreds of guests on this show, and I've never had anyone react like this to simple interview questions. Simple interview questions? Mark laughed bitterly. Jimmy, you've been taking shots at me from the moment I sat down. You questioned my authenticity, you mocked my background. And then you had the nerve to call me street when I called you out on it. I was just doing my job, Jimmy snapped back, his voice rising to match Mark's intensity. This is a comedy show, Mark. Everything isn't some personal attack against you. Your job? Mark's voice dropped dangerously low again. Your job is to make your guests feel comfortable so they want to come back and promote their projects. Your job is to entertain your audience, not to use your guests as punching bags for your own insecurities. Jimmy stood up now, finally meeting Mark's energy head on. My insecurities? You want to talk about insecurities? You're the one who can't handle a few jokes without threatening people. Threatening people? Mark stepped closer to the desk, and several security personnel moved closer to the stage area. Jimmy, if I was threatening you, you'd know it. What I'm doing is telling you that you're being disrespectful, and I don't appreciate it. Disrespectful? I'm disrespectful? Jimmy's voice cracked with indignation. You come on my show, you sit in my chair, and then you tell me how to do my job? That's disrespectful. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Mark stared at Jimmy for a long moment, his chest rising and falling as he controlled his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, but there was something final about it. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. This is your show. These are your chairs. This is your studio. Mark began walking toward the edge of the interview area. Which means I don't have to sit here and listen to this anymore. Where are you going? Jimmy called out, panic creeping into his voice as he realized the interview was falling apart on live television. I'm leaving, Mark said without turning around. Because unlike some people, I know when I'm not wanted somewhere. Jimmy, desperate to salvage the situation and probably his job, made one last catastrophic error in judgment. Oh, that's perfect, Mark. Just walk away. That's exactly what everyone expects from you, isn't it? When things get tough, just walk away. Mark stopped dead in his tracks. Slowly, deliberately, he turned back to face Jimmy. The look on his face made several audience members gasp audibly. What did you just say to me? Jimmy, realizing he had just poured gasoline on a fire, tried to backtrack. I didn't mean anything by that, Mark. I mean, you're leaving in the middle of an interview. No, Mark said, walking back toward the desk with purpose. You said that's what everyone expects from me. What exactly does that mean, Jimmy? What do you think you know about me that makes you think you can say something like that? The studio was so quiet that the sound of Mark's footsteps seemed to echo like gunshots. Jimmy gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with tension. Mark, please. Let's just calm down and finish the interview like professionals. Professionals? Mark was now standing directly in front of Jimmy's desk, close enough that the host had to look up to meet his eyes. You want to talk about being professional? A professional doesn't ambush their guests. A professional doesn't use their platform to settle personal scores or boost their own ego. Personal scores? Mark, I don't even know you well enough to have personal scores with you. Then what is this about? Mark demanded. Because this sure as hell isn't about promoting my movie or entertaining your audience. Jimmy's face went pale as Mark stared him down, waiting for an answer that everyone in the studio knew was coming. The host's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his desk, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You really want to know what this is about? Jimmy asked, his facade of comedy show professionalism finally cracking completely. Yeah, Jimmy, I really want to know, Mark replied, his voice steady and dangerous. Because I came here to do you a favor, to help your ratings, to promote my movie on your show. And instead, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me, so enlighten me. Jimmy stood up slowly, his chair rolling backward from the force. When he looked at Mark, there was something raw and bitter in his eyes that the audience had never seen before. You want to know? Fine. It's because guys like you make me sick, Jimmy said, his voice gaining strength as his resentment poured out. You come from nowhere, you screw up half your life, and then Hollywood just hands you everything. Meanwhile, people like me work for years, decades, grinding it out in comedy clubs, writing jokes, perfecting our craft, and we're treated like we should be grateful just to be here. Mark's eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. Are you kidding me right now? This is about jealousy? It's not jealousy, Jimmy snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at Mark. It's about fairness. It's about the fact that you can assault people on the street, get arrested multiple times, and Hollywood still rolls out the red carpet for you. But if someone like me makes one wrong joke, one mistake, my career is over. The audience was stunned into complete silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a real psychological breakdown happening on live television. Mark shook his head slowly, processing what he was hearing. Jimmy, first of all, I never assaulted anyone on the street. And second, you think my success just got handed to me? You think I didn't work for everything I got? Oh, please, Jimmy laughed bitterly. You made a couple of movies where you played tough guys and suddenly you're this serious actor. You think anyone takes you seriously as a performer? You're a novelty act, Mark. A curiosity. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Several audience members gasped, and even the camera operators seemed to shift uncomfortably behind their equipment. Mark stood completely still for a moment, absorbing the insult. A novelty act, Mark repeated slowly. That's what you think I am. That's what you are, Jimmy pressed on, apparently unable to stop himself now that the floodgates were open. You're famous for being famous, for being the guy from Boston who got lucky. Meanwhile, actual comedians, actual entertainers, we have to scratch and claw for every opportunity. Mark nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering Jimmy's words. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, almost conversational. You know what, Jimmy? You might be right about some things. Maybe I did get some lucky breaks. Maybe Hollywood gave me opportunities that other people deserved more. But there's one thing you're completely wrong about. What's that? Jimmy asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You said if you make one mistake, your career is over. But that's not true, is it? Because you're making a huge mistake right now, on live television, in front of millions of people, and somehow I doubt this is going to end your career. You know why? Jimmy didn't answer, but his confident expression was beginning to falter. Because you're going to spin this, Mark continued. You're going to go on other shows and talk about how I overreacted, how I couldn't take a joke, how I'm this volatile Hollywood prima donna who attacked poor little Jimmy Kimmel for just doing his job. And people will believe you, because that fits the narrative better than admitting that you're a bitter, jealous host who used his platform to try to tear down a guest. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not I wouldn't. You wouldn't what? Tell the truth? You've been lying to your audience for the last 15 minutes about what this interview was supposed to be. You brought me here under false pretenses so you could take your shots and feel better about yourself. The host's voice rose defensively. I brought you here to do an interview, which is exactly what we're doing. No, Jimmy, this isn't an interview. An interview is when you ask questions to learn something about your guest or to help them promote their project. This is a hit job. This is you using your position of power to try to make me look bad because you're insecure about your own success. Jimmy's face flushed bright red. Insecure? You think I'm insecure? I have my own show, Mark. I have millions of viewers every night. I don't need to be insecure about anything. Really? Then why are you so angry about my success? Why does it bother you so much that Hollywood gave me opportunities? If you're so secure in your own accomplishments, why do you care what happens to me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy looked around the studio as if searching for support, but found only the uncomfortable faces of his audience and crew. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but the venom was still there. Because it's not fair, he said simply. It's not fair that guys like you get to skip the line while guys like me have to wait our turn. Mark stared at him for a long moment, and when he replied, there was almost pity in his voice. Jimmy, there is no line. There is no fair. There's just people working as hard as they can and hoping for the best. And if you spent half as much energy on your own craft as you do resenting other people's success, maybe you wouldn't be sitting here at 2 a.m. attacking your guests because you're bitter about your own life. My own life? Jimmy's voice cracked with rage. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. You don't know anything about my life. You're right, I don't, Mark agreed. But I know what I see right now. I see a man who's so unhappy with himself that he can't stand to see other people succeed. I see someone who's more interested in tearing people down than building anything up. And honestly, Jimmy, that's just sad. I lay 8. Jimmy slammed his hand on his desk, the sound echoing through the silent studio like a gunshot. Don't you dare feel sorry for me. I don't need your pity, and I don't need your amateur psychology. I'm not giving you my pity, Mark said, stepping back from the desk. I'm giving you some free advice. Figure out what's really bothering you, because it's not me. I'm just the guy who happened to be sitting in your guest chair tonight when you decided to have your breakdown. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence that stretched for what felt like hours. Jimmy stood behind his desk, breathing heavily, while Mark remained calm and composed despite everything that had just transpired. Finally, Jimmy seemed to realize where he was and what had just happened. His eyes darted to the cameras, to his audience, to his producers standing in the wings with expressions of barely contained panic. I think, Jimmy said slowly, his voice shaky, maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Mark said firmly. We're not taking a commercial break. We're done here. This interview is over. He turned and began walking toward the exit, but Jimmy called out desperately, Mark, wait. Please, let's try to end this on a better note. For the show, for the audience. Mark stopped and turned back one final time. Jimmy, you want to end this on a better note? Here's your better note. Next time you have a guest on your show, treat them with respect. Don't use them as therapy for your own issues. And if you can't do that, maybe you shouldn't be hosting a talk show. You can't just walk out, Jimmy pleaded. This is live television. Watch me, Mark said simply. And with that, Mark Wahlberg walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live set, leaving behind one of the most explosive and uncomfortable interviews in late-night television history. Jimmy stood alone behind his desk, facing an audience that didn't know whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Jimmy's mortified expression as he realized what had just happened to his career, his show, and his reputation, all in the span of one disastrous interview. If you enjoyed this incredible story of one of Hollywood's most shocking moments,